When the liturgy of the word began, I watched in silent dread as the altar server stepped to the pulpit to deliver the first reading. He stood there, dark eyes scanning the open Bible, before he raised his head, looked up as though to speak. But all that came from his throat was the single tolling sound of that bell, and my head pulsed in pain. The same thing happened for the second reading, that long, drawn-out chime. Then came the reading of the Gospel. I walked to the pulpit myself and saw the passage indicated was Mark, chapter 9, verses 14 to 19.
I mean, yeah, it's almost like this entity is like making a mockery of, his religion and beliefs.
I began to...
Or showing that it means like nothing, it can't really do anything to him or something. I don't know, this is very interesting.
Try and read it, but my voice was gone. And from my own mouth came the sound of that bell. I fell to the floor, but no one moved to help me. Eventually I was able to stand again, and a dull panic began to rise within me as I realized that next came the liturgy of the Eucharist. The thought of these people, these things, taking the sacrament of Holy Communion, felt like the direst of blasphemies. I didn't stop, though. I didn't know what else to do, and my mind was swimming with the sound of that bell and the collective horror of all the things that I had seen and felt. The altar server brought me the communion wafers and the wine, and I took them. My hands felt strange and clammy as I held them, but I brought them to the altar and began to speak.
I think the most interesting thing about this is he's mentioned where it's like his will is still his own, and it still seems like he has a choice, right? He can leave and ignore this, but he's like choosing not to because it just like feels that he needs to be there or something, right? I feel like that's the most interesting. So is it some kind of subconscious thing in him where he like, I want to try to word this, right? Like, because he's like a religious person or whatever, and maybe it's a situation where he doesn't necessarily truly believe and he wants something more. And so like maybe through this like mockery of religion, he's feeling that kind of connection or something like that. I don't know. I don't know if I'm really like wording what I'm thinking properly, but that's kind of the gist of it, where, maybe he's seeking something more, a higher power, something greater. He's not really necessarily finding it in the church that he's with. And so like through this mockery of religion that this entity is putting forward, he's feeling connected to something that he never felt before. I don't know. But this is all very fascinating and also extremely creepy. What's going on, everybody? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day wherever you're at and whenever you're watching this. We're going to be jumping into the Magnus Archives episode 20, which is part 2 of Confession, the Desecrated Host. Right? Yeah, that's what it is. Desecrated Host. Links will be down below in the description as always to the Magnus Archives playlist in its entirety, the Rusty Quill Podcast YouTube channel, and to their website. So if you've been enjoying the Magnus Archives as much as I have, go over to the YouTube channel, like the videos that you've enjoyed, hit that sub button, check out their website and any kind of membership benefits and stuff like that they have if you want to give them some extra love and support. If you'd like to do the same for my channel, there's a join button underneath the video as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I have to offer. So you can take a look at those and see if any of that would have any interest for you. Regardless, I just greatly appreciate you coming and hanging out, watching the videos. Hope you enjoy it. If you do, consider leaving a like and a sub, as it helps me and the channel grow. We also have playlists for reactions to other universes, the SCP Foundation, Warhammer 40k, Warhammer Fantasy, Kaiserreich universe, etc., etc. So, like I said, there's playlists for those. So if any of that has any interest for you, you can check those out And yeah, enjoy. With all that said, YouTube plugs done. Get into the video here. Magnus Archives, episode 20, Desecrated Host. This is part 2 of yeah, this little mini series here, I guess. Get into it. Oops. Okay, no, I did turn it on. All right, there we go. Let's do it.
Rusty Quill presents the Magnus Archives.
They do be ominous. They do be.
Episode 20, Desecrated Host. Continuation of the statement of Father Edwin Burrows regarding his claimed demonic possession. Original statement given May 30th, 2011. Audio recording by Jonathan Sims, head archivist of the Magnus Institute, London. Statement continues. It was the first time I had experienced anything like that. By this point I was starting to suspect that I may have been having hallucinations of some sort, but I had never before felt a presence within myself, inside my being. It was a feeling.
So I wonder when it was that it attached to him. Was it when it must have been when he was doing the exorcism, right? And when the girl died, maybe it attached itself to him. And maybe that's how it works or something like that. I don't know.
So utterly awful it's hard to put into words. Like a reflex reaction, your muscles moving without any instruction from your mind, but rather than a quick twitch of the leg, it's a slow movement of your jaw, your lips, forming your mouth into words. Worse things were to come, of course, but I don't think any of them were so profoundly unsettling as that feeling. I only got a few streets away from Hilltop Road before I was no longer able to maintain my equilibrium and fell to the floor, violently throwing up. I could not deny then that there was something inside me, and I believed that whatever it was had entered me from Bethany O'Connor.
Right.
I tried to pray, tried to cast my mind to... I couldn't.
So I mean, I'm assuming we'll probably find out in the remainder of the episode, but like, he's a priest that does exorcisms, right? Wouldn't you think that he would seek another priest to help him? Like, they've already named someone else who does exorcisms with him, or with the church that he is a part of. So I would assume at some point he would go to them and try to, but maybe this entity prevents that from happening. Maybe he tries to do it and then stops him, because it already seems like, you know, this entity has some form of control over him.
As I tried, my throat closed, and I struggled to breathe. I lay on the side of the pavement, and I wept. Wiping my eyes, I took out my Bible and looked desperately within it for comfort, but when I opened it, though the page was within the Gospel of Luke, the words were from Genesis. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid.
Static.
And I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. Around that passage the writing morphed and swam before my eyes, and wherever there were words that might give me comfort, I found them obscured by dark stains. The bile began to rise within my throat again, and I desperately wanted to hurl the book away from me. I held it, though, for just a moment before I placed the small volume once again in my jacket. It took more willpower than I could have believed, but I kept it. I stood up shakily and staggered back to the presbytery. I slept for a long time and missed morning mass, saying I was feeling unwell. It wasn't a lie, of course. I just lay there for hours. There seemed a safety in stillness, as though inaction could do no harm. It was the first good decision I had made, and there isn't a day goes by I don't curse myself for ever rising from that bed. Nobody bothered me. I think word had gotten round that I was having a difficult time, and they were almost certainly trying to decide who would be best to talk to me, or even whether to ask the bishop to intervene. I decided that I needed to talk to Father Singh. I didn't think that he would be able to help me, but he was at least familiar with Bethany O'Connor's case.
You know, I guess also, right, like, if I were in his position, if I was in his position, right, and I performed or tried to perform an exorcism, and then myself got possessed, I guess I would also be wary of trying to get someone else to perform one, because maybe it would kill me, and then they would get possessed and be in this position. So that would also be quite the conundrum, right? Like, what do you do in that situation? Where do you go for help?
Perhaps he might have some insight into what was happening. I tried to find him quickly. The faces on each crucifix and painting I passed seemed to twist and sneer at me as I walked. My head was throbbing. The painted blood glistened as though still wet. I'm glad I didn't encounter anyone, for I was staggering so much they would likely have thought I was drunk. Finally, I found Father Singh in the small chapel. He seemed surprised to see me, and as I approached, his face fell and he backed away, ever so slightly. I can't imagine how bad I must have looked to get such a reaction from him, but I sat next to him anyway. I began to talk, to tell him everything that had happened. He remained silent as I spoke, until I began to talk about the exorcism I had tried to perform on Bethany.
I wonder, like, is it just that he looked terrible, or did the priest, like, actually see something, right? It almost kind of sounds like this Father Singh might be, like, the senior exorcist among them. So maybe he, like, actually sees something and is concerned. I don't know. It's interesting. Because, I mean, like, you would think, like, if a priest just sees someone that's ill, they would still want to help them, right? You know, they wouldn't just be like, hey, yo, whoa, wait, you look like shit, brother, back up. You know what I mean?
He held up his hand and asked if I'd prefer to speak about it in confession. I was momentarily confused and asked him what sin he felt I had committed. He looked at me, and I swear there was almost a smile on his face when he spoke. Spiritual pride, he said,
more static,
has led to quite a fall. Unsettled though I was at his attitude, I could not deny that he was right. I agreed, and we left the chapel. Soon I was giving my account as a full confession, and I could not keep from crying as I described what happened when I attempted to lay a blessing upon that house on Hilltop Road. I finished my account and waited for Father Singh to speak of my penance or absolution. Instead, he paused for a few moments, then said, "No, your sins are deeper than that." And he began to list them. Every transgression I had made since I was 6 years old. The disabled child I had bullied in primary school, the time I stole money from my mother's purse to buy cigarettes, the indiscretions I had had at the seminary. All of them. I had confessed them each before and been absolved, but not to Father Singh. And to hear them thrown back in my face as such a stark list of wickedness rattled me deeply.
That is very interesting. It's almost like the Father is taking pleasure in this. Is the Father actually some kind of demon? Like, you know, posing as a priest? Like, what is happening?
I noticed something else as he spoke. Father Singh only emigrated from Jaipur a decade or so before I met him, and he had always had quite a strong accent. But the voice that spoke now to read my litany of wrongdoing had no trace of it. It was a clipped and crisp RP accent, though in tone it seemed to match that of my friend. I leapt to my feet and ran from the room and towards the front door. I needed to get out, to get somewhere I could breathe. In the hallway I ran past 2 other priests who looked more worried than ever. One of them was Father Singh.
Wait, what? So he was like confessing. I think he was confessing to the entity. So the entity was talking to him. Or whatever demonic thing is possessing him. So he didn't actually sit there and actually talk to Father Singh. Interesting. Okay.
It was dark when I left the presbytery. I had no idea where I was going or why. I just had the desperate need to be somewhere else. The streets of Oxford should have been full of drunken students at that time on a Sunday night. At least, I thought it was Sunday. But they were almost deserted. Occasionally I would see figures standing or walking at the end of the narrow streets, but they were shadowy, silhouetted against what little light there was, and were always gone when I approached. I tried once again to pray, but the words died on my tongue. I have never felt despair on the sheer scale I did at that moment. The streets of Oxford are winding and speak to the age of the place, but I had lived there for no small amount of time and knew them well. That night, though, it was though I had never walked them before. I saw roads that I had travelled 100 times, but they seemed different. My eyes focusing on details I had never before marked, and each turn I found I did not know where I was going, or what place it would take me to. The world I knew had become alien to me, and I simply didn't know what to do. Finally, I found myself in front of the oratory on Woodstock Road. The church's large, round window shifted as I watched, as though it were a tremendous eye that were turning to focus upon me. The door was open, and from within, a warm light spilled out. Even in the depths of my, I suppose you could call it mania, there was something comforting about that light.
Now, I wonder if this light is a reference to the cave episode as well, with what the statement giver was talking about there. I'm wondering if this is some kind of parallel reference.
A man appeared at the door. He was tall and pale, and dressed as an altar server. I walked up to him. My vision was blurred, though I could not tell you whether it was my state of mind at the time or simply that I was crying. I should have known that something was wrong. I did know that something was wrong, but it didn't matter. I had no fight left within me. So when he told me that it was time for Mass, I simply nodded and followed. He led me through the church. It was bright. So bright. Candles covered every surface, each glowing so powerfully that I could barely look directly at them.
Again, this feels like a similar reference to that cave episode with candles, Lost John's cave. There were mentions of, them going down there with candles, and you saw like a super bright candlelight, I think, coming at her at the end. I wonder again if this is like a similar reference or to something with a similar entity.
The layout was how I remembered, but the pews were all empty, and I could see none of the statues or crosses that I expected. The man led me unresisting into the vestry, where I found my cassock and stole laid out in front of me. The stole was not green, as I would have expected for a normal Sunday Mass, nor was it violet or red or any other liturgical color. Instead, it was a pale, sickly yellow. I felt the eyes of the altar server upon my back and dressed quickly.
A sickly yellow that kind of goes along with the Meat Man episode, you know, the man upstairs with a rotting yellow sickly meat stuff. Interesting.
At that moment, the bell rang to mark the start of the Mass. It was a single, jarring tone that cut through the air and made me almost double over in pain. So badly did it pierce into my pounding skull. I regained myself, gripping the thin, bony arm of the altar server, and walked out into the church. The pews were full now, row upon row of people, far more than had ever before attended a Mass that I had said. Each was dressed in black from head to toe, and their skin was fevered, jaundiced yellow.
Jeez.
The eyes of every man, woman, and child stared blankly forward, and their mouths hung open, wide and smiling, like their jaws had locked in silent rictus. I could have left. I know that now.
I would have, yeah.
I know that my will and my actions were my own, and even at the time, I knew that what I was seeing was so wrong. So very wrong, but it didn't feel like, at the time, I could have made any other choice. Even in that strange place, stared at by hellish parishioners I must have known weren't really there. Forgive me. Even then, I thought to find some comfort in the liturgy. The odd-smelling incense swirled about me from the altar server's brazier, and my head swam with a scent that felt so familiar, yet so foreign. Finally, I stood before the altar and began the Mass. I was surprised as I spoke, and the holy names slipped from my mouth without hesitation. But the congregation I addressed were quiet, and each pause for a response was met with only that oppressive, wide-mouthed silence, a jarring void that tightened the fear I felt gripping my soul.
He'd mentioned something about speaking the holy names, right? So, like, is he actually reading from the actual Bible, or is he saying something else, right? It kind of wasn't clear. I wonder if they're gonna like clear that up or not.
When the liturgy of the word began, I watched in silent dread as the altar server stepped to the pulpit to deliver the first reading. He stood there, dark eyes scanning the open Bible, before he raised his head and looked up as though to speak. But all that came from his throat was the single tolling sound of that bell, and my head pulsed in pain. The same thing happened for the second reading, that long, drawn-out chime. Then came the reading of the Gospel. I walked to the pulpit myself and saw the passage indicated was Mark, chapter 9, verses 14 to 19.
I mean, yeah, it's almost like this entity is like making a mockery of, you know, his religion and beliefs.
I began to
For showing that it means like nothing and can't really do anything to him or something. I don't know. This is very interesting.
try and read it, but my voice was gone. And from my own mouth came the sound of that bell. I fell to the floor, but no one moved to help me. Eventually I was able to stand again, and a dull panic began to rise within me as I realized that next came the liturgy of the Eucharist. The thought of these people, these things, taking the body of... taking the sacrament of Holy Communion, felt like the direst of blasphemies. I didn't stop, though. I didn't know what else to do, and my mind was swimming with the sound of that bell and the collective horror of all the things that I had seen and felt. The altar server brought me the communion wafers and the wine, and I took them. My hands felt strange and clammy as I held them, but I brought them to the altar and began to speak.
I think the most interesting thing about this is he's mentioned where it's like his will is still his own, and it still seems like he has a choice, right? He can leave and ignore this, but he's like choosing not to because it just like feels that he needs to be there or something, right? I feel like that's the most interesting. So is it like, is it some kind of subconscious thing in him where he like, I want to try to word this, right? Like, because he's like a religious person or whatever, and maybe it's a situation where he doesn't necessarily truly believe and he wants something more. And so, like, maybe through this like mockery of religion, he's feeling that kind of connection or something like that. I don't know. I don't know if I'm really like wording what I'm thinking properly, but that's kind of the gist of it, where, you know, maybe he's seeking something more, a higher power, something greater. He's not really necessarily finding it in the church that he's with. And so, like, through this mockery of religion that this entity is putting forward, he's feeling connected to something that he never felt before. I don't know. But this is all very fascinating and also extremely creepy.
This time my words came out crisp and clear, and as I said them I noticed fewer and fewer of the parishioners seemed to be in the pews. Hope began to rise within me, as it seemed the words would work to banish these jaundiced watchers, and I pressed on. Finally, the pews were empty, and my heart soared as I turned towards the tabernacle to retrieve the rest of the host. It was strange. The rich cloth curtain that covered that ornate metal box seemed stuck. So I pulled and eventually it came free.
I feel like that's the
I
skin.
opened the door and retrieved the host, returning it to the altar. Then I lifted it to my mouth, and I ate. It did not taste as I expected. I'm sure you've guessed the reality of what it was I was eating.
Yeah.
I don't even know where I was. Some dingy basement from what it seemed when the light fell from my eyes and I returned to reality. At least, I assume this is reality. I dream sometimes that perhaps this is the illusion. My arrest and imprisonment merely a hallucination. That I'm not a
I feel like that would be one of the most torturous things ever, would having like a break of reality, not really understanding or knowing what is real, what's not real, you know, what's a dream, etc. You know, like at that point, do you even understand that you're still alive and existing? You know what I mean? Like,
murdering cannibal. It doesn't matter. I assume this is reality. I dream sometimes that perhaps this is the illusion. My arrest and imprisonment merely a hallucination. That I'm not a murdering cannibal. It doesn't matter. At that moment, seeing those bound corpses before me, I made the decision to take no action. Ever again. I will not commit the further sin of ending my life, but I sat there until the police came. I pled guilty to all the charges they laid before me, and now here I am,
Jesus.
doubting everything I see and hear. I do worry about the state of my soul, of course, but there is little to be done. My old colleagues have come by on occasion, and even the bishop once, but it doesn't help. Whatever they may actually be saying, all I can hear is the sound of the bell. Thank you for your time. Statement ends.
Jeez.
As it turns out, the second part of this statement was simply misfiled in the next folder, which was useful, although it does beg the question of who was reading it last. Martin is still absent, but Tim and Sasha both swear they haven't seen it before. Was my predecessor reading it at some point? That seems unlikely, given the state of the place. I find it hard to credit the idea that Gertrude Robinson actually read any of these files.
Hmm.
Still, it's hardly our biggest concern.
You know, that's also interesting because whatever that episode was where the guy was like going between realms and he could see, you know, like the like vines or tentacles or whatever they were, like stretching out the things, and they all led to Gertrude in the Magnus Archives Institute. So again, that's also kind of interesting that there's some kind of speculation of something with her.
It's difficult to know where to begin with a statement like this. If the person giving their testimony is unable to distinguish the real and the unreal, that doesn't usually bode well for anyone trying to find evidence. Let us begin with Bethany O'Connor. From what Sasha could find in the records of St. Hugh's College, she was indeed a student there, studying archaeology, matriculating in 2008. Everything Father Burrows says about her faith, her hospitalization, and her death appears to match up with official records. However, college records also list her as one of the students living in halls during her second year, rather than in an off-campus house.
Interesting.
And it was a porter who she attacked with a kitchen knife, rather than a housemate. In fact, according to the letting agent, there was no one living at 89 Bullingdon Road that year. So,
very interesting. So what was he doing going there then?
whatever Bethany was doing in that house, it wasn't living there legally. Father Burrows...
Huh. I wonder if that means that the entity was purposely going after the father and maybe led him there. I don't know.
His old colleagues from the church certainly remember his falling apart following the failed exorcism. They were apparently in the process of talking to the bishop to get him some help when the culminating incident occurred that led to his incarceration. Prior to meeting Bethany O'Connor, none of them had anything but the highest praise for the man. As for the incident itself, Father Burrows was found in one of the back rooms of 89 Bullingdon Road. He was wearing a butcher's apron and sat in front of two students, Christopher Billam and James Mann. They were both tied to chairs and quite dead. Cause of death was listed as blood loss from multiple lacerations all over their legs and torso, as well as removal of both their faces with a sharp blade.
Jeez.
Possibly a scalpel. The face of James Mann was found to have been partially eaten by Father Burrows.
So it's interesting, right, that like he saw this hallucination of like this religious ritual, you know? And so like I guess the question for me would be, right, like, did he actually do that? Or was all that stuff already set up for him? And then through his like vision that he had, he like consumed the body, you know, or the face or whatever the part of the body, but he didn't actually do the action of killing them and using the scalpel and all that. You know what I'm saying? I guess that would be the big question I have from this, right? Was that something that was already there and done by someone else, this entity, something else that serves this entity? You know, the other altar servant or whatever that he was seeing in this vision, was that the thing that had already killed these people or something, you know? Or did he actually do this stuff and he, you know, was just hallucinating? Um it's also interesting, right? Like, this is, out of all the statements, this is the other statement that I can think of alongside of the Lost John's Cave statement, where the statement giver seems to be giving an entirely different statement to what the actual facts are here at the end, right? You know, in the Lost John's Cave, she gave this whole story about how, you know, she was separated from her sister, and you know, the tunnels were changing, et cetera, but then there's audio at the end that almost makes it seem like um you know, she was giving her sister to be sacrificed in some kind of way. You know, take her, not me, take her, not me. And then we heard the steps and then kind of a yelp. and then the audio ended. There's also kind of a reference to a light and candles, etc., that match up with this. So I wonder if it's something similar, a similar entity or something like that, but interesting.
He pled guilty to all charges brought before him and is currently serving 2 life sentences at Wakefield Prison, though HMPS refused our request for a follow-up interview. What interests me is the paralleling of Father Burrows' climactic hallucination with reality, and the fact that at no point did he perform any actions that might be analogous with the binding and actual murder of the students.
Right.
Also, it strikes me that the altar server he described seems out of place with most of his other delusions, in that he appeared to have active agency, which is uncharacteristic for these visions the priest describes. Finally, there is the small detail mentioned in the police report that none of the tools used to kill or mutilate the victims were found at the scene.
Yeah.
This all leads me to believe that there may have been a second person there.
Someone else was there, yeah.
Although, from talking to the police, I get the impression that there is little appetite for reopening the case, considering how successful the initial prosecution was.
I mean, yeah. Why would they want to do that?
There's one other detail Tim uncovered that sticks out to me. It's a name I recognize, though I have no idea what it could mean. The oratory was obviously not the actual scene of Father Burrows' crimes, but there was one strange thing that happened a few days prior. They received a delivery of a pale yellow stole, which apparently vanished less than a day after they signed for it. This would be unusual, but not necessarily noteworthy, if it wasn't for the fact that one of the deacons recalled the package was handed to them by a company called Brecon and Hope Deliveries.
Aren't those the same guys that delivered the casket in like episode 2 or whatever?
End recording.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Very interesting episode. Very interesting
The
episode.
Magnus Archives is a podcast distributed by rustyquill.com and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike International License. Today's episode was written and performed by Jonathan Sims. It was produced by Alexander J. Newell, Mike LeBeau, and Murray Porter. And
Halfway
directed
point, we're
by
there.
Alexander J. Newell.
Halfway through
To
season
comment
1.
on episodes, make donations and view links, images, videos, and show notes. Visit rustyquill.com. Rate and review us on iTunes. Visit us on Facebook. Tweet us on Twitter @TheRustyQuill, or email us at mail@rustyquill.com. Thanks for listening.
All right, there you have it. You heard them, all the ways you can get in touch with them, support them, etc. Links will be down below in the description as always to the Magnus Archives playlist, the Rusty Quill Podcast YouTube channel, and to their website. So please do me a favor, if you've been enjoying the Magnus Archives series as much as I have, go over to their YouTube channel, like all the videos you've enjoyed, hit that sub button, check out any kind of ways that you can give them some extra support and love if you would like to do so. I kind of already gave my thoughts here before the very end, but this is a very interesting episode, just from the context of it, but also potential connections and references to other episodes, which I've already kind of talked about. And then, yeah, that last little note there at the end about the delivery service that dropped off the coffin in episode 2. So I wonder if this delivery service, if it is like, do they deal in like supernatural? Are they like some kind of like black market delivery service that deals in supernatural things? Are they kind of like the Marshall, Carter, and Dark of the Magnus Archives? Or are they in fact part of one of these entities or something like that, you know? I'm very curious to know about that, but they seem to definitely be dealing in some supernatural objects of interest so far. And yeah, like I said, some of the connections lead me to think that there's, you know, some tie-ins with maybe it's a similar entity being or religion of some sort that ties in with what happened in Lost John's cave, with the candlelight and the two statement givers essentially giving false statements, or at least they believe they're giving their reaccountment of their statement, but the facts that were told at the end from Jonathan Sims are different than what the statements they were giving us. So I find that also an interesting connection. And yeah, it seems like the father didn't actually really do this. It seems like someone else may have done it and he was set up for it. So I wonder if there's going to be any kind of information that's going to come out in the future that maybe will absolve him. Who knows? Who knows? But another great episode of the Magnus Archives. So yeah, like I said, links for everything will be down below. If you'd like to, you can, you know, if you want to give a little bit extra support for my channel, there's a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I have to offer, so you can check those out, see if that would have any interest for you. We also have playlists for reactions to other universes on the channel: the SCP Foundation, Warhammer 40k, Warhammer Fantasy, Kaiserreich universe, bunch of others. So there's playlists for those if you want to go and check those out and see if any of that would have any interest for you as well. Regardless, thank you guys for taking the time out of your busy day to come and hang out and watch the video. I greatly appreciate it. Hope you're having yourselves a great day. We'll see you on the next one.